Hey, this is John from Gadeon. Today I'm going to be discussing AI psychosis for a few minutes. Then I'm really going to be discussing a different topic. Not entirely, but what I think is really kind of the driving force of all this. And we also have some chess puzzle on the screen because I don't need any notes for this. So, anyways, what is AI psychosis? Well, basically, it is a phenomena where people believe that they are they believe things or act in ways that they wouldn't normally without the AI, giving them some kind of input. So, for example, this might be that you believe that you are a phenomenal mathematician out of seemingly nowhere. Um, or another big thing that comes up a lot is apparently people adopt relationships with a chatbot, and that's probably more a reflection of loneliness. But really, I wanted to kind of, focus in on the idea that we are treating chatbots as authority figures in a lot of cases. And I think what this is an effect of is mostly that we are lowering the standard of many things, but namely education over time. So the reason why that's important is because I think that anyone who really understands subject matters very well is not going to be convinced by a lot of what ChatGPT has to say, I would argue. Now, most of the time it's good, maybe 20% of the time it's pretty bad, though. So I'll give some examples of this, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about, the pressing matter, which I think is this lowering of our standards that's occurring. So, what are some examples of, AI in my own life kind of just messing up, things pretty dramatically? Well, one that came up very recently was regarding mathematical proofing, right? So when we are proving a statement, imagine that we wanted to, say we have three statements and want to say, okay, statement one implies statement two implies statement three, and, all these statements are equivalent basically. The idea is that we would say, okay, statement one implies two implies three, and then three implies one, and then we can see if they're all equivalent from that, right? So we only have three propositions or cases to prove. Then another part of this is that I think it's pretty obvious that if we just use examples of the statements being true, that doesn't make them true. For example, if I said all animals are green, and then I said, okay, well, turtles are green, therefore it must be true, you'd think I'm a lunatic, because it's obviously wrong. Yeah, I don't know what to do for this one, but maybe it's just because I'm talking too much. I do see that the queen is on this diagonal though, so we probably want to insert here. Anyways, so the point is though is that asking ChatGPT those kinds of questions, I think, well, one of the things that came out for me though was that, okay, first asking a similar question, it decided that it was going to use 4 keys instead of 3, which is I think obviously rudimentary silly. And then in the second instance of the same question, it also used like the proof by examples method, and that just doesn't work. Now you can disprove a statement with counterexamples, but you can't prove a statement with examples of the thing, right? Maybe that. No. Well, anyways, it's pretty terrible. Embarrassing to have Well, that's never going to be it. I don't know. Can't think. Oh, wait, maybe that. Oh, geez, that is it. Anyways, um, the problem is, right, that, if you didn't know any of that, what I just said about the things that are involved in proofing, then you would not know that it got those things wrong because it's so convincing when it says it, right? In fact, it gives no indication that it is wrong or that it doesn't know what it's talking about. Now, another example that came up, often for me, because I do enjoy asking it stuff like, oh, what kinds of books should I read to, learn a certain subject, for example. And, it'll give you a recommendation. It'll be kind of a mixed bag because sometimes it'll give you, like mass market books and it calls it textbooks, for example. Sometimes, or, calls them textbooks, for example. And sometimes it's obviously not going to take there. Sometimes it'll give recommendations and talk about the content of the books, and then you'll realize it doesn't even check the table of contents. You'll be asking, okay, could you rank these books in terms of their utility for learning a subject? Say, sure. Do you want me to check the table of contents now? Like, what does that mean? You didn't check the first time, even though that's the most obvious step. There's issues I've had with the formulae that it will use to solve certain problems. So, for example, one issue that came up in a, for example, in a calc question, that's it. It erroneously utilized a negative sign. I don't even know why it had there, why it had it there. It made no sense why it would put that in there. So, for example, errors like that. There's also errors I've experienced with, things like, bond valuation questions, because, it's just sometimes I just give a quick test run, right, for certain things. It's not very good at solving word problems, and oftentimes it can't select the correct formulae in those situations. Even though it would be, again, rudimentary for a human, right? Who knows what they're doing. I think there was one more set of examples that I had for that, but I'm drawing a bit of a blank on that. But anyways, there's at least one other set of examples that I have. But the idea really is that the chatbots talk with a great deal of authority. And so if you didn't know any better, then I don't think you'd have any inkling that it's really getting these things wrong. Which brings me to my other point, which is that I don't think that we'd view these things with such authority if more of us were experts on topics, or considered us ourselves to have some desire to be skilled in some area. Now, it's probably easier for me to say, of course, but I do think that there does need to be a recognition of a kind of new standard that's required for our education. And I don't mean what a lot of you think I probably mean by that, because I do think that a lot of the parroting online that people do should probably stop. There's a massive number of people, apparently, who comment on education as though people that go in to get a university degree do not walk out with skills that can then be applied in the real world. And so then they recommend things like certifications and stuff, which I think are not always, but largely money grabs a lot of the time. people do walk out of university with skills. And in fact, most of my degree was really dedicated to doing work in science, not just like learning theoretics. So I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand about, what getting a degree is like. But, I think that should be made clear. Yes, you do learn skills at a university, and you will learn skills in your degree. And my other conjecture is that theory is rather useful. And I think that when we walk around the lines of, for example, things like, no one would say of physics, for example, or math, that it's not useful to learn theory. But then when we move down onto other subjects, we often say of those subjects that they are somehow unique in that the theory is completely useless for them. And I'll get to some more specifics in a minute. But what I'm trying to say here, I guess I want to give an example of this first, right? So, for example, a lot of people have said of business that the theoretics or the educational component is largely useless, and I just don't agree with that. Now, you could say, for example, of a physics or like let's say a math degree, right? If you used a math degree to model Excel, run Excel models, then you probably find it, rather pointless. Likewise, if you used your business degree, for example, to operate a local flower shop, it would be largely pointless, because you don't really require much of that knowledge. Now, arguably, we might say of, for example, a topic like macroeconomics, well, maybe it's still useful for running a flower shop in some respect. Would it be useful to get an economics degree? I think that's, clearly very much overkill, right? But it's not like, even on those small scales, that we would say that it's completely useless to understand the ebbs and flows of the economy. Sorry if the chest isn't moving fast enough. I don't think anyone cares, though. It's still useful to understand the market in some respects. It's just overkill to have an entire degree. Now, on the flip side, though, we would say that it's clearly very useful to have a math degree if you're running genetic data models, right? And, if you ran an international business with operations, for example, like if you wanted to optimize your operations, and arguably that's also a math problem, but you would see the value in a business degree. And I think that's pretty clear. So I think that parroting has really done a lot of damage to the way that people view the standard of education that they should uphold for themselves. And honestly, when you think about it, all the experts that you have ever admired on anything have probably been well educated. So that's, my conjecture. Now, I would say, by the way, I guess a caveat to all this is that I don't necessarily mean that you must go and get a degree, but you should have some idea of the field that you're in. And my, personal criteria that I've always thought is pretty reasonable. I think the reasonable standard for people ought to be that if I understand something about your job better than you do, then I think you need a higher standard for yourself. And I won't comment more on that. I do think that's reasonable. But you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Anyways, the what am I saying? Yeah, like, I mean, at the very least, if you absolutely must, you can ask Reddit how to get free books. So, go and do that if that's what you require. But you should go and get educated, because I do think it's very important. And if not for acquiring skills, but I do think that it's worth understanding that all of the people who have ever said education that you will not build skills and the knowledge will be useless, they've all lied, or they don't know what they're talking about. You should honestly, if you're trying to get good at something, at least ignore them. If you're trying to make money, obviously there's other ways to do that, but if you're just trying to get good at something, I would say ignore them. That's a weird move, but I guess that makes sense. Anyways, yeah. So I think that's all we got to say on that topic. I think we're just gonna finish up the puzzle then and be on our way, just because I'm sure that everyone's wondering how this thing should end. And I'm not really sure right now, but I think the idea is just, okay, cool. All right, there we go. I hope that was enjoyable, and if you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and later.